Last time Kawhi Leonard played against the Nuggets, Russell Westbrook was wearing a Clippers uniform, and Paul George led all scorers with 25 points. The two teams have faced off 4 times this season, but between injuries on both sides and the fact that their last matchup was in early January, the actual lineups have not seen each other for even a second. So what can we expect from this series, and who ultimately has the upper hand? Nikola Jokic is one of the most scheme-proof offensive players we've ever seen. Last year's Timberwolves felt like the perfect defense to limit his strengths while highlighting the very few weaknesses. If he played from the post, Cat would use his strength to push the catch as far as possible, while Gobert cheated over to help protect the rim and take away any cuts. If he screened in the pick and roll, Cat would completely ignore the ball to take away the roll, while Gobert cheated over to take away any drives. And if Jokic was handling in the inverted pick and roll, Cat would go under the screen to give him the 3, and he shot just 23% from behind the arc in that series. So going back to what I said, this felt like the best defensive approach Jokic had ever seen, and he looked really uncomfortable for a lot of this series, only to walk out of those 7 games averaging 29 points, 11 rebounds, and 8 assists on 60% true shooting, further proving that he's the most inevitable offensive force we've seen since a prime LeBron James. All of that's to say, there's no such thing as shutting down Jokic, especially when it comes to individual matchups. But if there's anybody who has a chance, Ivica Zubac would make that short list of names. Since Jokic became an MVP caliber player in the 2021 season, Zubac has defended him on 588 possessions, so we're talking about a pretty big sample. And on those possessions, Jokic averaged about 27 points, 8 assists, and 4 turnovers per 75, while getting to the line 4 times and recording a true shooting percentage of 54.5%. That's pretty great volume production, but let's compare it to his averages over those 5 seasons. His scoring and assists noticeably climb, while his turnovers dip, he gets to the line more, and his true shooting percentage jumps all the way up to over 66, which is just a completely different planet of efficiency. This is a pretty big deal because historically the biggest challenge for playoff defenses going up against the Nuggets is figuring out how to guard Jokic post-ups. The Lakers never could find the answer, trying all sorts of different matchups, switching tactics, deploying AD as a free safety, and it felt like he either scored or assisted on everything. I already talked about the Wolves and what they did, and while it worked better than LA's approach, it still wasn't enough to stop him from picking them apart in a few of those games. And the problem is that he makes defenses pick their poison. If you bring help, he's finding the open man, whether it's a shooter or a cutter, but leave him in single coverage and he's the deadliest post scorer we've seen since peak Shaq. However, the Clippers sort of skipped the step of having to pick a poison because Zubac is arguably the best one-on-one Jokic defender in the league. No, he won't shut him down, nobody can, but he's both taller and has longer arms than Jokic, he's ridiculously strong, and he moves his feet well, so when it's time to win on that block, he can hold his own without needing some aggressive help. In those spots, the rest of the Clippers defense will be all about not losing cutters or shooters because the Nuggets roll guys will constantly be moving and screening to hunt for openings, and if there's even the smallest window, Jokic is finding them for easy offense. I'd assume they end up switching everything 1 through 4, which means Denver will probably be hunting for a lot of mismatches for their bigger forwards to attack. Or they'll try to get Harden matched up with Jamal so that they can set up their 2-man game, which is where I think things get really interesting for LA's defense. Jamal is one of the best pull-up shooters on the planet, and Jokic is not only the best short roller we've ever seen, he's a threat to pop out for 40% threes, so Zubac is put in some really tough spots. More times than not, Zoo's looking to drop, but I'm not sure how viable of an option that is against the Jamal and Jokic pick and roll, especially if they're able to get a guy like Harden or Bogdanovic switched onto the point of attack before setting up. And in starting and closing lineups, it's pretty likely that either Powell or Harden will find themselves matched up quite a bit with Michael Porter Jr., so his 3-point shot could end up being a pretty huge X factor if they start going to the 2-man game between him and Jokic. The huge advantage that LA does have, though, is that a lot of these Denver lineups consist of players that the Clippers' wings should be comfortable helping off of. Guys like Brown and Gordon have shot really well from 3 this year, but I think they'll be tested to prove themselves on 5 or 6 attempts a game, and off the bench, I don't think any one of Watson, Pickett, or Westbrook are drawing closeouts, so the Clippers can get guys like Kawhi, Derrick Jones Jr., or Nick Batum roaming behind the play while Zoo plays up at the level of these screens. I do think anytime they're able to bring Zoo out to the 3-point line, though, that's a huge advantage for their offense. Not only is he a bit slower footed than the average big, the Clippers really rely on him to carry the bulk of their rim protection and rebounding duties. So if he's out in space, now all of those wings will have a much easier time cutting into the lane or crashing the offensive glass for second chance opportunities. For that reason, I'm expecting the Nuggets to deploy Jokic a lot more like a wing or even a guard than a traditional big. If they absolutely need a half-court bucket, I do still think a Jokic post-up is option number 1, as he'll probably draw single coverage, but on the average possession, I'd expect lots of inverted pick and roll with him going at a guard, or lots of off-ball action with him running around down screens or back screens to free up for jumpers or cuts, and potentially find mismatches to exploit. The big difference between the Jokic of this year and last is that he's shooting 42% from 3 while leading the league in heaves by a landslide, so you can't just go under screens or sit back and bait him into the shot like the Wolves did in Game 7. If Jokic is playing from out in space and they're looking to attack Zubats on the perimeter, I'd expect Denver's pace to be a huge factor in this series. Another huge difference from last year is that they went from one of the slowest teams to one of the fastest, and part of that impact has been Westbrook, who I'm expecting to be pretty important in early offense situations as a ball handler. As far as the Russ thing goes, I think there's a chance that his ability to initiate becomes a lot more critical to Denver's offense than people realize. Again, going back to that Wolves series, an even bigger factor than the way they defended Jokic was the way they completely shut down Jamal, and at the forefront of all of that was their constant full court pressure, making it so difficult for him to even get it across half court that they actually started using Aaron Gordon as their point guard. Chris Dunn is one of the best in the game at pressuring the ball, and with him hounding Jamal 94 feet, they'd really benefit from a guy like Russ getting down court with a head of steam and putting the defense into rotation. All things considered, I'm expecting a pretty big offensive series from the Nuggets. If Gordon and Brown are hitting from 3, there really isn't a good answer to the 2-man game, and Jamal should be able to get going as a scorer. Jokic post-ups might not be as big of a factor as they could be in other matchups, but between his ability to play point center, his outside shooting, and his utility off of screens, he's still one of the most dynamic offensive threats the game has ever seen, and will dictate basically every possession. If they're able to get out and run, all 3 of Russ, Brown, and Watson should get some easy points, and my only serious concern is the non-Jokic minutes, which will probably have to be very scarce in order for them to gain an advantage in this series. With all of that said, though, the question was never whether or not the Nuggets would be able to create good offense. It was whether or not they could create good enough offense to outscore what the Clippers are going to do. LA's primary action is the 1-5 pick and roll between Harden and Zoo, and no matter how many possessions I watch, I just can't find a reasonable answer for the Nuggets to slow it down. They'll likely start and close games with Brown on Harden, and he isn't nearly a good enough screen navigator to keep him from turning the corner with an advantage, which means Jokic is going to consistently find himself in impossible situations. He's a pretty weak drop defender, and Harden's one of the best we've ever seen at attacking the 2-on-1, so drop isn't much of an option, but as soon as you put 2 on the ball, either in a hedge or a trap, Harden's creating an advantage for Zoo in the short roll, and the Nuggets do not have the necessary backline help to stop them from getting a ton of great shots. Typically, the Nuggets rely on Gordon to be their primary weak side rim protector, but he's going to be matched up with Kawhi, and that's not a guy you can leave, so he won't be in a position to help. Jamal will likely be matched up with Norman Powell, which creates a whole new set of issues that I'll talk about in a sec, but he's another top tier shooter who can't be left open, and that means MPJ will be the only guy who can make a play, as he'll either be matched up with Dunn or Jones Jr. He simply isn't big or strong enough to handle Zoo out of the post though, which means he's gonna have to pre-rotate, meet the ball early, then the Nuggets will have to scramble out of that advantage to prevent the Clippers from getting into a second side attack, and it's as simple as I don't think they have the personnel to do that, especially if the Clippers go into a more offensively slanted lineup with Bogdanović at the 3, meaning that it's essentially a Harden-Zoo pick and roll with 3 40% shooters who can all make plays off the catch. So as far as the high pick and rolls go, I don't think the Nuggets will be able to slow them down at all without some sort of masterful pre-switching or rotational scheme to keep Jokic away from the ball, unless they get really creative with their lineups and get Peyton Watson on the floor alongside Gordon. That's the one guy who I trust to consistently protect the rim, and he's got the speed to scramble, but it would come with some trade-off of spacing and overall skill and offense, so it creates a tough decision for the coaching staff to make. With that said though, the Harden and Zoo pick and roll is only one of the Clippers' many offensive weapons. Going back to Powell, if he has Jamal on him, they'll look to exploit that matchup as much as possible. He's a guy who they love to use off of screens, whether that's a down screen, a cross screen, or even a ball screen, and he beautifully pairs his high-level three-point shooting with explosive slashing to just burn weaker defenders in these spots. The Nuggets can probably put 2 on the ball in these situations more than against Harden because he isn't the same caliber of passer, but that still risks giving up an advantage, and now you're forced to scramble out of the same sort of setup with little secondary rim protection. I also think the Clippers will look to hunt for mismatches for Kawhi to attack. With Gordon on him, he can't play his style of bully ball, middle of the floor one-on-one game as effectively, but if they get him running off of screens from a guy like Dunn or Jones Jr., they'll be able to force quite a few switches, and from there we've seen very few players more efficient in isolation. Speaking of using Dunn or Jones as a screener, I think that would be their go-to counter if the Nuggets bring Watson into the game as a roamer. They just simply have them screen for Harden on the ball to force the switch, and then Harden would play one-on-one because, like Kawhi, he's still one of the most efficient isolation scorers the game has ever seen. And without a true rim protector at the 5, Zoo can play from the dunker as a lob threat and potential offensive rebounder, or they'd go to one of their double drag concepts with a screen to get Harden the switch before setting up the pick and roll with Zoo, and we're right back to square one. Really, it all comes down to how many different ways the Clippers can attack the Nuggets in these starting and closing lineups. If it isn't a Harden Zoo pick and roll, it's a guard-to-guard screen to create a mismatch, or it's a down screen for Powell, or it's a size advantage for Kawhi to attack, and Denver simply doesn't have the personnel to cover all of these different weapons without giving up something every time down the floor. Then you pair that with the fact that during the non-Jokic minutes, the Clippers will always have the most reliable offensive creator on the floor because Harden at this age is still one of the best floor raisers in the league, and he'll be playing alongside scoring options like Bogdanović and either one of Powell or Kawhi. For those reasons, I do think the Clippers have the advantage in this series. I'm expecting the Nuggets offense to be absolutely surgical, and as long as Jokic exists, his team will always have a really good chance, but the Clippers simply have more ways to attack them while also having way better defensive personnel, versatility, and more ways to slow down what Denver wants to do. So I think it would take one of those outlier hot performances from Jamal or role players really hitting their threes in order for the Nuggets to win the scoring battle. Ultimately, my prediction is the Clippers in a really tough 6 games, getting their revenge from the bubble and winning their first series in 4 years. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think's gonna happen in this series. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.